Welcome, everyone, to the Science of Saw-whet Owls. I'm Brett Thelen. I'm the science director here at the Harris Center and also on the owl banding team. And I'm here tonight with Hillary Siener, our lead owl bander, and Susie Spickle, who's our community programs director. She's going to be managing the chat. So you all are experts at Zoom by now, but we always like to offer a few reminders for folks because maybe we're getting a little rusty now that we're doing more in-person things. But a few reminders for Zoom. So first, you notice that we are recording tonight, and we're planning to post this on the Harris Center's YouTube when we can, so that the folks who weren't able to attend can watch that. If you don't want to appear in that recording at any time, the best thing to do is to turn off your video so that we can't see you. That's also a good idea if you've got slow internet or unstable internet. That can help speed things up. We do have closed captioning enabled for tonight, and you can decide for yourself whether you'd like to see that. You might see a button at the bottom of your screen that says CC or more. That's where you can either hide or show subtitles. And because there's so many of us tonight, we're going to be asking you to put questions and comments in the chat and to keep them on topic. We're here for owls, so happy to talk owls in the chat and leave the other stuff at the door. Did I miss anything, Susie? Okay. Well, in that case, I'll also just do a little welcome for those of you who might be new to the Harris Center. I know we've got people zooming in from all across the continent. So if you're new to us, the Harris Center is a nonprofit organization based in the Monadnock region of Southwest New Hampshire, where we help people fall in love with the natural world. We do that in three ways. We protect land for people and wildlife alike. We're now at more than 27,000 acres, much of which is open for hiking and birding and other recreation. We coordinate conservation research projects on our lands and throughout the region, including the one you're going to hear about tonight, which is my favorite. And then really at the heart of all we do is education for all ages, from babies in backpacks to residents of retirement communities and all points in between. And we've got an incredible calendar every year for the general public, everything from birding outings and film showings and hikes and snowshoes and paddles and Zoom talks like this one. So on that note, I do want to mention two upcoming Zooms that I think might be of interest to you. One is 1 week from tonight. So same time, same place, and it's Paddling Through Time, the Long History of Canoes in New England with archaeologist Dr. Bob Goodby, who specializes in Paleo-Indian archaeology, and he has some new data from newly carbon-dated dugout canoes that were found in New Hampshire lakes and ponds that he's going to share with us as he talks about the vital role that canoes and canoe travel played in Indigenous communities across New England. So that's 1 week from tonight. And then 1 month from that, in March, as we're starting to think spring, we have Matthew Meyer Bolton, who's a local writer and filmmaker and great thinker. And he's going to be giving an overview of the geologist Raphael Pumpelly, who had an illustrious and adventurous career and who now has a trail named after him on Mount Monadnock. And so that's going to be a really exciting talk, I'm sure, including world travels, geological and archaeological adventures, and some controversial opinions. So we hope you'll join us for one or both of those. And with that, I think it's time to get to it. I'm going to share my screen, and so we can start talking owls. Tonight to talk about the science of saw-whet owls. I'm going to talk in the beginning about a little bit about saw-whets and how we study them, and then Hillary Siener, our lead owl bander, is going to share some of our findings from this past fall, as well as our first 4 years of the project. So as a little overview, we'll talk a little bit about the natural history of the owls, who they are, where they live, some of the challenges that they're facing in the world. Then we're going to talk about our owl banding project, including how we study these owls, some of our findings, as I've said. That's going to be when I pass this over to Hill. Our next steps, things that we're looking to in the future, a really awesome opportunity to support this project and also have a connection to your own individual owl with our Adopt an Owl program. And then we'll have questions at the end. And Susie will be moderating the chat. And so if you've got questions throughout, just pop them in the chat and then we'll answer as many as we have time for at the end. So we're going to start with just a little bit about the northern saw-whet owl. This is the smallest and I would argue most adorable owl species in the Northeast. They are only full grown, about 7 to 8 inches in size. So think about the size of a soda can. And they typically weigh between 75 and 100 grams. So that's about on par with a stick of butter. So they are tiny but mighty. They get their name from one of their calls, which early colonists thought sounded like sharpening a saw with a whetstone. And even though they're small, they are predators. Saw-whets are a bird of prey, just like all owls. And so we think of them as adorable. And I think if we were a mouse or a vole, we might think of them as fierce and threatening. So that is primarily what they eat, is small mammals. Mice, voles, occasionally songbirds. Like most owls, they are nocturnal, active at night. And they're also pretty secretive. So while they're predators, their small size means that they're also prey. And it behooves them to blend in as well as they can to keep themselves safe from larger owls, like barred owls, as well as mammal predators. And so they're pretty elusive. Some folks in the chat when we were getting started had said that they have seen saw-whet owls. And I have been part of this banding project for 4 years, and I volunteered on a different banding project for several years before that. And so I've seen a lot of saw-whet owls, and I've never seen one I've never seen one in the wild that wasn't part of our banding project because they're so secretive. So those of you who've seen them are pretty lucky. A little bit about their nesting. They nest in mature northern forests. They are secondary cavity nesters. So that means that they repurpose holes in trees that have been made by other birds, primarily woodpeckers. So that's the secondary part, is that the cavity was created by someone else and they moved in. It also means if you're really lucky, they might nest in a nest box. This picture was shared with us by Tom and Anna Marie Warren, who live in Dublin, New Hampshire, and they had a family of saw-whets in their nest box for a season, and was pretty amazing that they got to see that. My nesting timing is typically March through May in our area. And interestingly, they don't often reuse their nests. So I'm sure many of us are familiar with birds that do come back to the same sites year after year. I have my Phoebes who come and nest on my garage each season. Saw-whets don't generally do that. It's rare when they do. Where they live, so they are, as I said, they breed in the breeding season in northern latitudes and high altitudes. So we do have breeding saw-whet owls here in New Hampshire. There's a much higher density of them to the north of us. The purple area is where they live year-round, and the blue areas on this map are where they migrate to in the winter time. But their movements are pretty difficult to categorize. They're not as clear-cut as many other species. So I think we often think about, say, our broadwing hawks, all of the broadwing hawks that breed in New Hampshire migrate down to Central or South America for our winter and then come back. And in many cases, we're learning, other research that the Harris Center is involved in, we're learning that they have really close attachment. They go back to the same wintering sites and the same breeding sites, and they may even use the same migration routes. Saw-whets are a bit different. For starters, they're a short distance migrant. So the furthest that they're going is Alabama or northern Florida. Some years they may not go that far, and some birds may not migrate at all. Some saw-whets may just stay year-round in their breeding territory, but they're not going all the way to South America like some of our songbirds or other raptors. We talked about this just before with their nesting. Site fidelity is the term that describes their attachment to a particular place. And so many birds, like my phoebes, are attached to, in this case, my garage, where they come and they nest every year. Saw-whets have low site fidelity, meaning that don't seem to be attached to particular breeding sites, and they don't seem to be attached to particular overwintering areas or migration routes. So they're wanderers. And this is something that the Saw-whet Owl Banding Network is helping us learn more about them. And so it's a bit difficult to describe them. Are they nomads who roam widely in search of food? Probably. Are they also eruptive, which is a term used to describe if you have a year where there's maybe really good breeding success, so there's lots of young fledged birds, or really poor food resources, then you might get a big southern movement. We see this most often with finches. So there has been some thought that saw-whets are eruptive in that way, and that there might even be cycles where every 4 years or so that they migrate in greater numbers to the south. But the banding network that we're part of is finding that it may not be as clear cut. And Hill's going to talk more about that later. So they do have some challenges, like many birds. The first, of course, is climate change. National Audubon Society considers them a climate vulnerable species, and under kind of current warming scenarios, they predict a 27% loss in the saw-whets winter range and a 72% loss in their summer range by 2080. And that's primarily due to things like wildfires that can destroy their habitat, heat waves, in the spring, which can endanger young in their nests, and heavy rain from these severe storms that we're starting to see more of that can flood nests and make hunting difficult at a time when young need to be fed. Habitat loss, of course. This is why land protection is so important. So habitat loss to things like wildfires, but also development and logging. Every raptor and really every predator is struggling these days with rodenticides, specifically second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, which are poisons that we put out as, we meaning humans, put out as bait for mice and rats. And when they eat that poison, after they've become sick, but before they've died, they may wander out. And because they're sick, they may be easier to catch. And so when a saw-whet owl or a broadwing hawk or a fisher or a fox catches that mouse and eats it, that poison gets transferred to them. And this is a real growing concern. And there's also a lot of growing advocacy and work to curtail the use of these rodenticides in our communities. Vehicles, particularly for birds that might be swooping down to catch mice and roadsides, can be a concern. And because they're small birds, free roaming cats can be a challenge for them too. And all of this kind of taken together means we really need to, even though they're a common species, and in fact, they used to be considered a rare species because nobody ever saw them and barely ever heard them. The banding network that we're part of revealed that they're more common than we realized. But in order to keep them common, we need to collect some more information about them that can help us inform really good conservation decisions. And so that's where the banding network comes in, and the bird banding. Some birds, some birds are easy to study in other ways. So if any of you have ever been to the Hawk Watch at Pac Monadnock in the fall, I encourage you to check it out if you're local to us, or to your local Hawk Watch if you're not local. They're all over the continent. You can go up there on a fall day and you can look out and you can see hawks flying by and you can count them. And that's one way of monitoring that migration. And you're able to do that because they're larger birds and they're traveling by day. And so they're visible. Saw-whets, because they're nocturnal and secretive, we can't just go out and look for them and count them. And so we turn to bird banding as a way to help study them. This is a picture of the bands that we use with our saw-whets. So bird banding, for those of you who might not know, it's really one of the oldest ways of studying wild birds. It's a foundation of much ornithological research. Much of what we know about wild birds, we've gotten through bird banding. The very Very first birds to be banded were in 1804 phoebes that were living in John James Audubon's yard, and he was able to catch one and tie a silver thread around its leg. And then those birds flew away for the winter, and when they came back in the spring, that silver thread was still there. And so he knew that they were the same individual birds. And that's the basis of bird banding, is that we have these little rings, these bands that we put on the legs of birds. They each have a unique number, like a social security number. There's no other bird on the continent that will have that number on their leg. And so that enables us to tell one individual saw-whet owl from another. All of these bands are issued and regulated by the USGS Bird Banding Lab. So it's a centralized network. That's where the bands come from. It's where all of our data goes at the end. All of the data is maintained by the Bird Banding Lab. And we really need this at the federal level because birds don't abide by state boundaries too much. So it needs to be a bigger system than that. And it's also important to say that because bird banding involves handling birds, you really need to be well trained, and in this case, you also need permits from the USGS Bird Banding Lab. So they manage the permitting too, and people train for many years in order to become bird banders, to make sure that they have the skills that they need to safely handle the birds. The other thing about bird banding is that there's the band, but there's also data that is collected at the same time as when we're putting the band on the bird. And some of that data can only really be collected in hand, like physical condition. For some species, like saw-whets, you cannot determine age and sex unless you have them in hand. And we don't do this, but some projects might take blood or feather samples in order to test for lead or rodenticides or other toxins. So why band birds? What can we learn from banding birds? The first big bird there on the left, her name is Wisdom. She's a Laysan albatross, and she was first banded in 1956 by a biologist named Chandler Robbins while she was on her nest on Midway Atoll in the North Pacific. 1956. She has been spotted there again this winter and many winters in between. Laysan albatrosses don't reach sexual maturity until they're at least 6 years old. So that means that Wisdom is now at least 75 years old. And we know that from banding. So we can see that it's her coming back each year by the band on her leg. The younger bird, much younger bird, on the other side is a kestrel trick that was banded as part of the Harris Center's kestrel nest box project. We band all of the hatchlings that hatch in the nest boxes that we monitor. And that's a way of also telling things like survivorship. So a year from now, if that hatchling finds itself in another nest box, we'll be able to tell that that bird survived the year. And we might also be able to tell some information about where they went, what kind of habitats they're using. Some birds also have additional bands put on. Like you can see Wisdom's right foot has a red band with a number. That's designed to be seen through binoculars, so you don't need to catch her again in order to see the number. And being able to identify individual birds that way enables us to study their behavior as well from a distance. So these are often the things people think of when you think about bird banding, and they all require us to encounter that bird at least 2 times. The first time when we put the band on, and then another time when we see the band again in order to collect all that other information. But the chances of encountering a banded bird again are pretty low. For songbird banding, it's less than 1% of banded songbirds are ever seen by humans again. Saw-whets have a higher rate because of the methods we use, but it's still only 3%. So what makes it worth doing when 97% of these birds won't be seen by us again? There's a ton of other data that we can glean from that time we have them in hand. So by doing long-term repeated monitoring year after year, you can start to detect population changes. Are you seeing more owls at the same time each year or less? You can also assess productivity. If you're seeing a high percentage of very young birds, that might mean it was a good breeding year. Migration timing, which Hill will talk a good bit about from our project. How is that changing over time when migration moves through? When is the peak? And then also health. We take you can take some measurements of health and then put them all together and get a sense of the overall health of a population. So that brings us to our project. Our saw-whet owl banding project was started in 2022, so we've just completed our 4th season. And I'll share a little bit about how we do what we do. And first I should say our project is part of a larger network called Project Owlnet, which far predates us. It was founded in 1994 by owl biologists to facilitate communication, cooperation, and innovation among hundreds of owl migration researchers all across North America. They've also standardized monitoring techniques so that we're all doing the same thing all across the continent, and that way our data can be pooled together to answer some really big picture questions about these birds. So all of our banding is done according to the methods established by Project Owlnet, and we share information with them as well. And there's more than 100 stations that are active across the continent right now. The blue ones are the active stations. The orange are historic. You can see that there's some real clusters in the Northeast and the Midwest and on the West Coast. But we're all part of the same network. So methods here for where we do this and when. Because saw-whets are nocturnal, this happens at night, which mostly means it's under starry skies. And every once in a while, when we're really lucky, we might be out there banding under the northern lights. This was from last 2024, a picture that Hill took on a banding night. So it takes place at night. We typically open about an hour after sunset. And Project Owlnet standards are that we run for at least 4 hours. Sometimes we might go a little longer if there's a lot of birds, and sometimes we might end early if conditions change and it's no longer safe to run the station or if weather is not good. Our season, we run from early October to mid-November to try to capture the peak migration through our region. We only band on clear, calm nights, no rain, no high winds. So high winds are an instance where we might, and rain both, when we might have to close early on a given night. And we band at 2 sites on Harris Center lands. We go back and forth between them. They were chosen for a variety of reasons, things like the fact that we own and manage that land, access, that we can get there pretty easily, the forest types that are there, slopes. And we've banded at both of those sites for all 4 years of the project. So the question I get asked the most is, how do you catch them? And this is how. It's pretty common bird banding technique. These are mist nets. They're named mist nets because they're very, very fine, kind of like mist in the air, and they're very hard to see. And so these nets run about 12 meters long, so that's about 40 feet long and about 10 feet high when they're fully engaged. And we've got 4 of them at each site. You'll see in this that they're a little baggier than normal in this picture because we've lowered them in order to take a bird out, but they have pockets in them so that when a bird flies in, it doesn't bounce right out. It's not taut. They're kind of cradled in these pockets until we go and get them out. And we don't leave them there long, which I'll talk about in a minute. In order to attract owls to our nets, we play an audio lure. We have a speaker broadcasting the courtship call of the male saw-whet owl, which I'll play for you. So we hear that for at least 4 hours a night, and then in our dreams when we get home, it's going the entire time. And the idea is that saw-whets who might be moving through the area hear that really loud male owl down below, and they're wondering what he's going on about, and they come down to check it out. And if they don't see our nets, then they fly into our net. Oops. And we have a volunteer or staff member stationed at the nets at all times in order for owl safety. So we check the nets every 10 or 15 minutes. We also this year, through a grant from the Davis Conservation Foundation, were able to purchase a thermal monocular, a thermal scope that when we look through it, we can see things that are warmer than the surrounding landscape that are generating their own heat. And we can see them in pretty good detail. So that enables us to see when an owl has flown into the net and to go and get it out of the net as quickly as possible. It also enables us to scan for anything else that might be in the woods that might present a danger to the owls. It's been a really great tool. So as I said, we have someone stationed there all the time. We're running regular checks every 10 or 15 minutes, but also if we hear or see that an owl has flown into the net, we'll go and check it. Then we will safely extract the owl from the net. This is part of the reason that owl banding requires so much experience and training to learn how to do this safely and quickly to minimize stress on the birds. And then at the nets, we place the owl into a cloth bag, which keeps them calm while we carry them back to our banding table, which is about 3 to 5 minutes away. So we want to keep things as quiet as possible at the nets, except for the tooting. So we do the banding a little bit further away. And we get there, we remove the owl from the bag. They don't always come out quite this gently and cute, but I mean, they're always cute, but some of them are a little feistier. And the very first thing we do is check that bird's legs for bands to see if they are already banded, because they might be. And Hill's going to talk about how many already banded birds we encountered this year. If they're not already banded, we band them. So the bands are, again, these little very lightweight aluminum rings that need to just crimp down around the leg. We use specialized pliers. You can't get a great view of the pliers in this picture, but they have holes in them so that you cannot squeeze them all the way shut, so that you cannot hurt that bird's leg, no matter how tight you squeeze. If you squeeze too tight by accident, you can't squeeze too tight. We also move the band around their leg several times to make sure there's no feathers stuck in that. Saw-whets have very feathery legs and feet. So we move the band and make sure that it's fitting just right before we move on. The next thing we do is we weigh them. And the way that we weigh them is we put them into, yes, that's a tomato paste can. They are pretty much all floof. So they fit in very easily. They're only in there for a few seconds. It keeps them still and calm while we weigh them. And there's air holes in the bottom. So they're just in there briefly, but that enables us to get their weight with this little portable scale that we have. Our banding assistant, Anna Marie, likes to call it canning season when we're out there weighing saw-whet owls. And the next thing we do is we measure their wing. And because saw-whets, you can't tell from looking whether you have a male or a female bird, but you can tell by looking at a combination of wing length and weight most of the time. And so that's why we take these two measurements, is to ultimately to determine the bird's sex. And this is a specialized ruler that helps us do that. After that, we look at their flight feathers to help determine how old they are. So saw-whets, like many birds, will molt their flight feathers in somewhat predictable patterns, which Hill will talk a little bit about in a bit. And so when we look at them, you can see that the bird on the left, when we're looking at the top of those feathers, there's some feathers that are kind of a grayish brown, and there's others that are more of a milk chocolate brown. The grayish feathers are new, and the chocolate brown feathers are older, so that darker pigment has worn. On the right, you can see what those feathers, what owl feathers can look like under black light. So when they're new, owl feathers have a pigment in them called porphyrin, and it fluoresces pink under black light. And over time, it fades with exposure to sunlight. So that bird on the right there has those bright pink feathers that are brand new, and it has some of those feathers with white patches that are older. And looking at that can help us figure out how old that bird is. After that, we look at fat and the muscles around their keel. We do that by blowing very gently on their to blow the feathers aside on their belly because fat is often stored in their furculum or wishbone. And in this case, fat is actually a sign of good health. They need that to fuel their journey. And then the keel, we can look down the keel and look at the muscle tone kind of along their breastbone, which is also a sign of whether they've been eating well. And then we also take other notes, the most common of which is the presence of these parasitic flat flies, which we remove when we find them. And other notes might be things like if they have a broken feather or a strange toe, or if if they're particularly ornery, something like that. But the most common note is the flat fly, and we won't linger too long because we all find them probably as gross as you find them too. All of this is recorded, but this is one of the key roles of our volunteers is recording data in our binders. And then after everything, we've double checked that we have everything that we need. We put that owl back into the bag so that it can readjust to the dark because we were doing all this by headlamp. And so we want them to have their eyes adjusted to the night. And then after they've been in the bag for 5 minutes or so, one of our volunteers or staff will take that owl to the dark woods, turn off their headlamp, take the owl out of the bag and place it on the crook of their arm, and then wait for the owl to fly off on its own whenever it's ready. Sometimes they fly off immediately. This bird on Austin's arm probably took, 15 minutes to fly away. She needed a little bit of encouragement in the end, but she got there. And so then they fly off, and sometimes they stick around and watch what we're doing with curiosity. The red light, I should say. So we release them. It's totally dark. Occasionally, we will turn a red light on our headlamp to take a photo or just to see what's happening if a bird hasn't flown away, just to make sure it's okay. You can see that it doesn't affect the bird's dilation at all. So the red light is a gentler way to look at them briefly if we need to. And then at the end of the season, all that data that we've written down in our paper binders in the middle of the woods has to be entered into spreadsheets, and then it's sent into the USGS bird banding lab. It's also shared with Project Owlnet, and then we share it with you through talks like this and also reports on the Harris Center website. And then that brings us to our next section, which Hill's going to talk about, which is our findings from this season and before. So take it away, Hill.
All right, thanks, Brett. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. So as Brett said, I'm going to walk us through a little bit of the 2025 season, and then I'll do some comparisons from our previous 3 seasons as well. So for this year, we ran from October 4th to November 15th, which is pretty standard for what we've been doing for the last few years as well. This year, we caught 140 owls. That turns into an average of about 5 owls per night, which has kept us very busy, which is great. We only had 2 nights during the season with 0 owls, but on both of those nights, we did hear them in the trees above us. They just decided not to come down to the trees. So during the October 4th to November 15th timeframe, the nets were open for 26 nights and closed for 17. And on those 17 nights, 12 of those were due to weather, so it was high wind or rain or snow. And then also a couple of conflicts, like scheduling conflicts that we had. And then sometimes we take time off right on the full moon. And that's because the full moon illuminates the nets, possibly making them more visible to owls. So next slide. So this chart shows the number of captures that we had this season. Our biggest night was on October 17th with 15 owls. And our average capture day, which is kind of another way of looking where in the calendar the concentration of movement occurs, was on October 23rd. And next slide. So because our nights may vary with scheduling or weather, we need to standardize our data by looking at overall effort. This basically helps us to understand the intensity of movement of the owls. So we do this using what is called capture rate Basically, this takes into account how many nets are open, how many hours they are open for, and how many owls that we caught. So it standardizes our data if we were to operate a different number of hours each night due to weather, or if we could only open 2 nets for some reason on a particular night. So on October 17th, when we caught 15 owls, our capture rate was 0.94 owls per net hour. So still reflecting the largest movement of the season, as you can see on the graph here. And the pattern on this chart is very similar to the previous chart of captures. If you just go back for 1 second, Brett, you can see that the pattern is very similar, and you can go forward again, that's fine. So, and that's because we had a very consistent effort throughout the year. We had 4 nets open every single night, and we rarely worked more or less than 4 hours, which is kind of unusual for us, actually. In previous seasons, we'd stay open for 5 hours pretty often if we were catching a lot of owls, or we would close early when the weather was bad, and that didn't happen to us a ton this season, with the very exception being the last night of the season. We caught 3 owls, and we're only open for an hour and a half because we had to close with a snowstorm that was coming in. So that's why that last point there for that night of the season is pretty high capture rate for that night. So next. So because we are not necessarily open the same nights every year due to weather or scheduling, and because we want to compare from year to year, I like to look at the intensity of movement by week of the year as well. So this chart shows our average capture rate with standard error each week that we operated. So week 43, which was October 19th to the 25th, was the peak week for saw-whet movement through our region this season, with an average capture rate of 0.57 owls per net hour. And just a note, like there's no bar on week 40 because we were only open for 1 night that week and we had 0 captures. Next slide. So this chart shows the sex ratios of the owls we caught this year. 89% were female. As Brett said, the females are larger than the males, weighing at least 93 grams. So that's how we know we definitively have a female. And then unknowns fall between 78 and 93 grams. And if their wing measurements fall outside of a specific table, they have to stay in an unknown category. And capturing more females than males is a common phenomenon at banding stations, and I'll talk about that more in a bit. Next. So this chart shows our age ratios. Hatch years, or owls that hatched in 2025, made up 31% of our captures this year. And the remainder of owls were in at least their 2nd year of life, having hatched in 2024 or earlier. So generally, this reflects kind of a mediocre breeding season, breeding year in 2025, and I'll discuss that more in the context of other years from our data in a bit. I did want to talk about these photos here a little bit. Brett did talk a little bit about the aging of these owls. So the top right there is our hatch year owl. They have kind of that consistent dark chocolate or smoky gray kind of appearance on their flight wing feathers. And all these feathers grew in at the same time, so they have a pretty even color tone. So that's a hatch year owl, and that's how we age that owl. 2nd years molt their flight feathers in a very predictable fashion. They molt their outermost primaries, which is kind of close to my fingers on the right there in the bottom right corner of the slideshow. And their innermost secondaries, which is kind of hard to see in this photo, I guess, but closer to the tail in that photo there. So those are the new fresh feathers that grew in that season, and they're that darker, kind of dark chocolate color. And then the feathers in the center of the wing there are kind of a coffee brown color, and those are the older retained feathers from their hatch year when they grew them in as a hatch year, and those are more faded over time. That's why they're lighter in color. 3rd years generally have a pretty predictable fashion, but I prefer to put just about anything older than 2nd year as an after 2nd year because it can be a little bit tricky. And that's when we use the black light for helping to age. And as you can see, those pink feathers are the ones that are fresh with fresh porphyrin or that pigment in their feathers. And then the older feathers are kind of white and faded at that point. Next. So as Brett said, typically about 3% of all saw-whet captures are of previously banded owls, which is a pretty high percentage. For us this year, it blew us out of the water. 6.4% of our captures were of already banded owls. So 9 owls we captured were already banded. And just kind of uniquely, each banded owl was from a different state or Canadian province this year too. I don't think that's ever happened to us before either. A lot of times we catch a couple from Pennsylvania or even from the same station in one of these states as well too. So just nothing really to draw any conclusions from that, but just sort of an interesting little fact from the season. We also, 4 of the owls that we have banded between 2022 and 25 were found elsewhere this fall migration season too, including 3 from different banding stations in Massachusetts. Unfortunately, 1 owl that we banded in 2022 was found dead on a roadside in Maine in March of this last year. So even though it's a sad ending, because she was banded, we were able to learn where she had moved to and that she was 5 years old when she died as well too. So next slide. So now I want to look at kind of our 4 years of data altogether and look at how they compare to one another. In total for the project, we've captured 441 owls over 4 seasons, which is really great. And most of the nights we've been out, 85% had at least 1 owl capture. And the majority of the nights where we didn't catch anything, we know saw-whets were around because we were hearing them. They were responding to the audio lure that we used. They just didn't come down to the nets. So 2022 was our lowest capture year with 53. And 2024 was our highest capture year with 148. Next slide. So, but 2025 had our highest capture rate of the season, or of our seasons, possibly showing that more number of owls were moving through the region than we had in previous years. This could be a reflection of good overwintering survival from the previous year, keeping population numbers high, or perhaps just more owls migrating further south than other years. And I said that it's possibly showing a higher intensity of movement, only because there's a couple of variables that I wanted to point out that could have a slight impact on our capture numbers as well. For example, in 2025, we had funding to switch completely to a larger recommended mesh size for our mist nets. This allows the owls to get caught a little bit more easily. When we were using bigger holes, they just get caught a little better. Smaller songbird nets, they can bounce out a little bit more easily and don't fall into the pockets quite as well. So we switched completely to the recommended mesh size this season. Second, 2022 was our pilot year, so we were kind of bouncing around and figuring out our methods, so that could have impacted our captures to some degree. And then finally, operating from 2 different sites on alternating nights could see slight differences in owl movement dependent on weather, altitude, and habitat. But either way, many of the capture trends that we're seeing at our sites so far seem to reflect what other stations are encountering annually as well. So, next. Okay, so I'm going to show a sequence of charts here to compare our 4 years of data. So this is 2022, which the peak week of migration was week 43, or the last full week of October. And next. So 2023 is the orange bars here, and you can see that the movement for the owls peaked week 44, which was the last few days of October and early November. And in 2023, Eastern Project Owlnet sites also confirmed a late movement as well. So this was not unique to us. Other stations documented that as well. And next. 2024, in the black bars, we see that movement again peaked in week 43, which was the same as 2022. And just kind of a side note that that bar, the black bar to the left in week 40, the reason there's no standard error there is because we were only out 1 night and we happened to capture a good number of owls that night. And next, 2025, and the yellow bars, which I showed before, movement timing again was the same in week 43. And as you can see, that intensity of movement was the best we had had out of our project so far. And next. So average capture day, again, is another way of looking where in the calendar the concentration of movement occurs. The previous chart shows about a week delayed movement in 2023, but the mean capture day shows that it was only about 3 to 5 days later than our other years of the season or other seasons. So our range in average capture day has been between October 23rd and October 28th. So a five-day range difference, which is pretty good. Next. This graph shows the number of owls captured by age each year. So the darkest gray at the bottom shows the number of hatch-year owls, while the remainder are birds in their second year of life or older. So in 2022, 64% of the owls we caught were hatch-year. Typically in years with higher hatch-year proportions, we get bigger flights. But our captures were pretty low overall compared to our more recent monitoring. And again, this was our pilot year, so take that with a grain of salt. We had a lot of stuff going on as we were trying to figure out our season. And then 2023, many stations were expecting that year to be a bust because of where we were in the population cycle. There was also a poor spruce and fir cone crop in the eastern boreal forest the fall prior, which can contribute to poor breeding success. Also, if you guys remember in 2023, there were really bad wildfires in May and June in Canada that year. That likely impacted nesting as well. And our data did confirm that it was in fact a poor breeding season with only 13% hatch years. But overall, the flight, even though it was delayed, was pretty large. Many sites were seeing a lot of adult birds moving through, and some hypotheses for this included good overwintering survival prior to the breeding season. And in 2024, most eastern stations reported a large influx of hatch-year owls. Most of them were getting around 50 or 60% hatch-year captures. But for us, only 37% of the owls we caught at our site were hatch-year. And I still need to look into some hypotheses for this, but overall, it just helps to reinforce the benefit of being part of this larger network and helping us to understand the population as a whole, even with some local or regional differences. And then 2025, as I mentioned before, was relatively evenly spread with ages. And as you can see, the higher second year numbers that we had this year, they could possibly reflect that better breeding season that had been reported in 2024, even though we weren't able to document it that year. Next. So I did want to talk a little bit about population cycles for saw-whets. It was generally known based on banding data from the last 30 years or so that saw-whets have a 4-year ebb and flow population cycle with really good breeding seasons and influxes of hatch-year owls moving through regions roughly every 4 years, and then followed by a drop-off. So this population cycle has become much less pronounced over the last decade or more, and we are not sure why that is at this point. To add to that, banding data from some sites indicates that the population has been relatively stable over the last 25 years, but there's a slight non-significant negative trend that is showing. Next. So this graph shows the number of owls captured by sex each year. The overwhelming majority of owls we capture are females, as I mentioned before, and this is true across all Project Owlnet stations. Next. So there are a number of hypotheses as to why stations catch mostly females. You can click next again. One is that we are playing the male's breeding call. So females may be more attracted to it, even though it is the wrong time of year. And next. A second is that males may be disinterested in the call or wary of getting too close to a big sounding saw-whet and avoid the area altogether with that audio lure blasting. However, even before the use of the audio lure, fewer males were being caught at banding stations. And next. Another hypothesis is that the species has a sex-differentiated partial migration where males do not migrate or migrate as far as females. Northern latitude banding sites catch proportionally more males than southern latitude sites, which is why this hypothesis carries some weight. Adult males may have a competitive advantage in establishing and maintaining a territory if they don't migrate or don't migrate as far. They may also be more effective hunters in challenging winter conditions, given that they have more experience as the primary provisioners during nesting season. And next. And southern latitude sites are more likely to catch hatchier males rather than adults. This could be because hatchier males will more readily migrate with the females since they do not yet have a territory to protect. And I didn't show these charts, but we catch a pretty even distribution of ages for the males that we do capture. So we're not only catching hatchiers, we're catching a whole range of different ages. And again, so there's a lot of stuff going on here, but it could be a combination of many of these factors as well. But either way, these are hypotheses that are still awaiting additional evidence to confirm as to why we catch so many females. Next. All right, so this is the one of my favorite parts is looking at this map here. This map shows how owls we captured have moved around North America. So we've documented 20 prior season encounters, which are the dotted lines on the map, and 10 same season encounters, which are the solid lines. So prior season encounters are owls that were encountered in a different season from which they were banded. So for example, an owl banded in 2024 was encountered in 2025. This information allows us to understand how owls move across the region, and we can learn about their longevity and overall health over time as well. And then same season encounters are owls that were encountered in the same season that they were banded. So for example, this year in 2025, we captured an owl on November 8th that had been originally banded on October 1st in Quebec. So with these owls, these same season encounters, we can learn about their general direction and rate of movement, in addition to how the owl's condition may change over that short time frame. So the same season encounters we've had have revealed a relative rate of movement of an average of 10 miles per night. Some fly at fast rates from one point to another, while others possibly take a much more leisurely course. And though some research suggests that saw-whets stick to migratory flyways, they can be quite nomadic within those routes too. So they may stop somewhere and then fly north again for a little while and hunt before flying south again, or just move from place to place. Movement is generally south-southwest overall, with some easterly movement as well. Particularly the owls that move around the Great Lakes may have options as a direction of travel, preferring to avoid flying directly over water and staying over safer forested regions. We know that they can fly over the Great Lakes, but suspect that they prefer keeping to the forested areas. And then just wanted to highlight our Midwestern captures from Wisconsin and Michigan are of particular interest. Those took place this year from banded birds. The Wisconsin owl was banded mid-October of 2023 and ended up at our site a little over 2 years later. And an owl banded in Michigan in 2024 ended up at our site almost exactly a year later, showing a tremendous deviation from its location the year before. So again, these owls moved around the Great Lakes, so they may have some options as a direction of travel. But I suspect this is also a situation that documents their nomadic tendencies and also their low site fidelity to breeding and wintering grounds, meaning that they do not often return to the same location year after year. But we're still learning a lot about this with these owls too. So next. So speaking of their nomadic behavior, I wanted to point out this interesting observation we had that you can't see on the previous map. So an owl we banded in Hancock on October 28th of 2024 was recaptured 12 nights later, 5 miles away at our other station to the west. So it was clearly in no rush to move further south, and perhaps it just kept wandering in search of good hunting opportunities, or it decided to winter in the region as well. Next. So I know we're getting close on time here, but if everybody's okay staying on, we'll just keep plugging through. So our project is documenting their timing of movement, direction and average rate of travel, some of their nomadic tendencies, and we're gaining insight into their population dynamics as well. And we'll keep learning more about this as we continue to gather data. And though there's a lot we can tell about the owls just from our one monitoring station, there's also tremendous value in the larger collaborative network that is Project Owlnet. The network shares a common goal of understanding the ecology and life history of these and other owl species as well, to learn what management steps may be needed to conserve them in the future. So with the project being just over 30 years old, there is a lot that we have learned about the owl through this network, and there's a lot that's still being discovered as well. And next. So our plan for the Harris Center project is to continue operating a long-term monitoring station in the region, and we're going to work towards being able to operate nightly as well during fall migration, provided that the weather is okay on those nights. We're not quite there yet because of full-time work schedules and other conflicts. So we also are discussing and have plans to dive into other research avenues and collaboration projects as well. So for example, next year we will be piloting placing some tracking devices on the owls to monitor them through the MODIS network. I'm not going to go into too much detail about MODIS here, but basically through this network, we'll be able to learn more details about migration routes, flight speed, stopover behavior, overwintering habitats, and so much more. And we will continue to offer public demonstrations and give talks about this project as well. I think at this point, I'm turning it back over to Brett.
Yeah, we just have a couple more slides and then we can take questions. So I do want to mention there is an opportunity for those of you who are local to us to come and see this in action. We host several banding demonstrations each season because education is such an important part of the Harris Center's mission. This past year, I think we had 5, and then we also had a group from a graduate ornithology class. So the folks on the left is a picture from this season, and that is the look on people's faces when they see a saw-whet owl come out of the owl bag for the very first time, and it's like the best. I will say that these fill very quickly and have very long wait lists. So if you're local and you're interested, check our website, the Harris Center website, in early September for your best chance at joining us for a night of banding. And before we take questions, I want to mention that if this project moves you, we would love your support to enable this project to continue. We do that through our Adopt an Owl program. So for a $50 donation to the program, you can symbolically adopt an owl. Unfortunately, you don't get to take an actual owl home with you, but you do get an adoption certificate, and we have gift adoption certificates as well that have the owl's band number, the date and town where they were banded, age, weight, sex. And then I saw a question about how do we know when our birds are encountered again? That's all through the Bird Banding Lab network as well as Project Owlnet. So if we hear about your bird, we will contact you and let you know what the update is about your bird. So that's that special connection with an individual bird that you can get. And we have an Adopt an Owl page on our website if you're interested. But lastly, before we take questions, we just want to offer our gratitude both to funders and to the volunteers and staff who make this project happen. This year's project was supported by the Davis Conservation Foundation. The first 3 years of the project were supported by the Harris Center's 50th Anniversary Fund and Adopt an Owl donations. And then we've had, over the course of the 4 years, 27 volunteers and staff who have spent many chilly, dark nights in the cold woods, late nights, I might add, often approaching or after midnight, to be out there and help make this happen. And so we're really grateful for everybody's efforts and camaraderie and appreciation for the owls. And of course, we have to thank the owls themselves because they're the best part for all of us. So with that, we can take questions for those of you who are able to stay. And I'm sorry we went just a little bit over, but Susie, do you want to share some questions with us?
Sure. Well, first off, just to thank Brett and Hillary for this great presentation. It was so interesting, and I'm sure everybody here loved all the photographs of those incredible creatures. And there were a lot of questions, and I want to start with one that I'm sure everybody is wondering. This is sort of a combined question from Francie and Nora. They want to know if you guys have any tips on where you might see a saw-whet owl in the wild. And that might even include like the best time of the month to hear them. What month? Is there a moon phase, time of night? And then Nora had a follow-up question, which was any ethical guidelines on just people in their backyard using a call to call in the owls. So what do you guys think about that?
That's a question for Hill, probably.
So in terms of finding them, like Brett, I don't think I've ever actually seen one without catching them in the net, but I do hear them fairly often, mostly in the winter, and sometimes during breeding season as well. And of course, if they're calling like that, I don't necessarily want to seek them out because it could mean that they're trying to set up a breeding territory and I don't want to disturb them. If you stumble across one, the most likely place that's going to be is in a thick pile of leaves or brambles somewhere. So it could be like your rhododendron bush in your backyard, a clump of beech leaves on a dead branch somewhere, thick mountain laurel, anything like that is a possibility. And another way you could potentially see one too is to listen for chickadees and titmice making a lot of racket. They might be trying to mob a saw-whet owl if they feel threatened by it. So that's a good way to look for them too. In terms of ethical callback stuff, yeah, it's kind of a fine line. I wouldn't do it. I would not do it during breeding season because you do not want to disturb that activity. So March through May, June, even July when the young are starting to move out. Winter is probably a decent time to do that. My only thing would be don't do it on especially cold nights because they're under a lot of stress already trying to stay warm. So if you have a warmer winter night, it might be worth trying to do some calls out your window, or if you're out for a walk in the woods at night or something like that.
And just a reminder, can you guys do the call for us? That was a question that just came in. You described it as tooting. I know you played it, but anybody want to do it?
Toot, 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 toot. Think of a truck backing up. That's that courtship call.
They have a number of different vocalizations, but that's the breeding call you're going to hear, and the one that most people will associate with the saw-whets as well.
That's great. All right, here's a question from Renee. She was wondering if they outgrow the band. So can you just talk a little bit about the band and how it works on the owl's foot?
Do you want me to take that one, Brett, or?
You can. I can take it and say that their legs don't really grow. So the band they don't outgrow the band. If they did, we wouldn't do this because we wouldn't want to harm them. So we're banding them at a time when their legs have essentially stopped growing.
These are full-grown birds that we're banding. Yeah.
Okay. Another question is, and this came from a couple of people, Becky and Diane, and maybe other people wondered it too. What are some of the other things you might have accidentally caught in the nets?
We, knock on lots of wood, have been pretty fortunate so far. In the past, we've had issues with flying squirrels getting into the nets. When they get in, they like to chew through all the lines. So they make a bit of a mess, and it can be a pain to reattach the lines to make sure that the pockets are still going to work for catching owls. At our sites, we do catch barred owls on occasion, and they can also do some damage to the nets because they're such a large bird, and these nets are not designed to support them. And I have heard that other stations earlier in the season might catch bats. That has not happened to us at this point. And then sometimes people catch mammals that might be running around on the ground too. I think a raccoon has happened before, but usually they're able to rip themselves out, so it's nothing that we have to handle.
Oh, Hillary, I remember you telling me a story about a group that caught a snake.
Yeah, there's a story about somebody who caught a rattlesnake once at a southern site. and they had to rig up a pocket knife onto a stick to try and cut the snake out of the net, and it worked. They got it out, but yeah, not something you expect to see at your site. So
Great. Just a question about how long they live. What's their lifespan?
yeah, I think the average is probably about 3 years. That's what the banding data is revealing so far. Brett, maybe you remember, what was the maximum age that was
I
reported?
believe the oldest wild banded bird was 10, and there was a bird that was living in captivity that lived to the ripe old age of 16 because they were getting regular food and didn't have the threats that the wild birds face.
It's pretty good. There was a question from Nora about how do the cone crops relate to the northern saw-whet owls breeding kind of system? You mentioned that if the cone crop is fails, then the numbers go down. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship?
Yeah, so in the fall, I think it was the fall of 2023, there was a bad cone crop. And so that leads to poor small mammal production the following summer during the breeding season because overwintering would be pretty hard for small mammals, specifically redback voles up in the boreal region. So if there's not a ton of food up in the boreal region for saw-whets, they're probably not going to be able to sustain their nest or their young very easily. So it's a bit of a staggering in terms of the cycle of those years there, but that was that reason there. So.
That's
Susie, you're
about,
good. Yeah.
yep, sorry about that. That's about it for questions. There was a lot of questions about the audio luring in more females, but I do feel like you really talked about that and answered that question. So that was about it. And I think it's time that maybe we say a big thank you to both of you for this presentation and for your hard work on this project, and to all the volunteers who have been out there on cold nights in the dark. And thank you to all of you who came out tonight to hear this. And Brett and Hillary, I'll stop
Yes.
talking and turn it over to you.
Yeah, just to thank you everyone. Truly could not do this without our volunteers and the other staff at the Harris Center that participate in this project. And we really appreciate you all coming out to talk owls and staying a little long for some more questions. So thanks everyone, and maybe we'll see you out there next October at one of our banding demos. So
Thank
good
you.
night all.